I miss her. I miss her so much. Let's see. You gotta see. We're not on mute. Tell me what? What are you seeing that I cannot see? What's that? Okay. Where's us? Right there. Oh. I didn't even notice me. I'm so fat. Oh, you sure they can't hear us? Unmute it.
We can hear you.
Oh, you can hear us? Hello?
We can hear you.
Yes, we can hear.
Good morning.
There.
Morning.
Morning.
Good morning from Big One.
Jesse, don't cry. Good morning, Jesse. That's my. Why, Jesse? Timing you? Oh, yeah. Can we have your autograph? Ready? Oh, yes. I don't know technology. Is that mute already? I have. Just like me. Hey, my smiling face, by the way. Those nuances. I know. Okay.
Hey, Ray. I'm your sister.
But I'm going to.
Ray.
I'm your mom and daughter's uncle's niece. Repeat that again.
Relena Aguero. Hi.
Actually, $4 and some cents. When I didn't find my glasses, I bought me glasses. Look at this one.
I saw Sash. Morning, Sash. Morning, Jane.
Franny.
Morning, Auntie Jane.
This is 1.50 and I'm a 2.7.
Hey, Fran, are you guys sharing the laptop too?
We don't have laptop.
Franny,
Yeah. Laptop.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
We're using our
you guys are
phone.
sharing, yeah?
Morning.
Oh,
What an
okay.
energetic group. It's so lively. I mean, even if we're not all together
morning.
in one room, I could feel the energy. So what we'll do for Faye, do you have the capacity to mute?
Hey, Kaylani.
I'll be there.
Faye, are you able to mute for a bit, our participants?
Yes,
Hi, Kaylani.
Hi. Hi to me. There's so many people on here.
Okay, so we'll get started because
You got
Michelle,
muted. We can't
you're on
hear
mute.
you.
Sorry. But I love the energy. I love the creative mask. I love breakfast, even if we're not all together, and just people saying hi and passing virtual hugs and kisses. So it's nice to feel that energy. And I'm sure Dr. Colade, our presenter, appreciates that. We see Miss Trisha on, and I see some familiar faces, lots of familiar faces. So we'll get started. We're about 8 past the hour of 8. And we do have a lot of topics and great activities for you today. So we'll get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Agigi. I'm from the University of Guam, CEDARS. CEDARS stands for Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities in Education, Service, and Research, and Service. So it's a mouthful, yeah. So we're very, very happy to host your para-educators training. We were approached by Miss Trish. Actually, we had the topic or the idea already brewing because our guest presenter facilitated a workshop for our regional partners like Saipan, CNMI, as well as American Samoa. So we figure, why not bring her to our Guam folks? And you folks are actually one of the first ones here on Guam to get this training from Dr. Gretchen Colade. She's great, and the reason for that is because we do know that you folks play a very, very important role in assisting our students with disabilities to progress academically, socially, intellectually, emotionally. You folks do it all. You're basically between the school and the parents. We know that
Ms.
the parents
Michelle, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me. I know I'm unmuted. Could it be maybe you want to adjust your volume? Sorry.
I can hear you.
Is that better? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
We can
Okay,
hear you.
great.
Maybe just check your audio settings.
Okay, so without much further ado, because we're like 10 minutes past, I'm going to pass the baton to Leah to introduce our guest speaker a little bit more and also to go over our Zoom etiquette reminders. So enjoy your conference, have fun, learn a lot, and take it back with you to your kids, to your students, and to your colleagues, right? At the school that
Sorry.
you're assigned to.
We cannot hear you. You put yourself on mute.
No.
No, it's we can hear you. It's probably just the audio settings. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Okay, just like Michelle. and
Yes,
then-
we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, allow me to introduce to you Dr. Gretchen Colade. She is a retired special education teacher, having spent the majority of her career teaching students with severe disabilities. She's currently the state leadership manager of Able Tech, Oklahoma's assistive technology program. She was a teaching assistant professor at Oklahoma State University. Dr. Colade's research interests include increasing the capacity of for educators to meet the needs of all students and their families, collaborative team processes, and implementing assistive technology devices and systems to support communication of young children with complex communication needs in early childhood, inclusive settings. She earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Special Education from Old Dominion University, a Master's of Education in Early Childhood Education from Boston University, National Board for Professional Teaching Standards Certification in Exceptional Needs in 2001, and renewed the certification in 2011, and a Doctorate of Philosophy in Professional Education Studies with an emphasis in special education from Oklahoma State University. She's currently working on renewing her national board certification for the second time. On a personal note, Dr. Colade is a guardian and best friend to her older brother, Michael, who has multiple disabilities and live in a group home in the Washington, D.C. area. She brings a special family perspective to her teaching, her research, and the presentations because of Michael. Again, we are proud to present to you Dr. Gretchen Colade.
Thank you so much, Leah and Michelle. And I just have to start by saying I sit in awe of being even a very small part of this training. I thank both Michelle and Leah for all of their work to put this together. And I especially thank you, paraeducators, for taking the time this week. We're going to spend 10 hours together. So we're going to get to know each other. And I'm going to share information with you all that will help you do your jobs in a way that best supports your students that you work with. So I'm going to start to share my screen. As always, we live in PowerPoint. We use PowerPoint technology to share information, mainly because some of us, well, most of us are visual learners. Supposedly research says 80%. I think almost all of us do better if we see it in writing, and it does something in our brains to help us remember. So good morning on Monday, July 26th in Guam. Realize that I live in Oklahoma. So right now it is still Sunday evening. And so I always get to kind of chuckling with Michelle and Leah about, okay, make sure I'm in the right time for our trainings. So anytime you attend a training in the future, which I really hope you will, one of the things that it has been my experience as a teacher and then also as a researcher is that when paraeducators receive training, sometimes they go back to school and become incredible special educators. And so realize that anytime you attend a training like this one, there should be a financial disclosure. And I always kind of wondered whenever I first started attending trainings, why are they saying this? But realize that, for example, throughout this entire week, I'm going to refer to different assistive technology devices that are suggested for you or that I have used successfully in my classrooms. And I want you, though, to understand that I don't get paid by any of these people who create these devices to sell them to you, okay? So there is no relevant financial relationship that exists. And I will say that every single evening because it's that important for us to let you know. A couple of conferences ago, back before COVID hit, I went to a workshop that promised to teach me some things about early literacy. And I walked in the door, and the moment the second slide came up and it said, we're basically the program and we're selling it to you. Luckily, I had sat at the back and I was able to get up and go, because realize that people who are selling you things are not necessarily going to tell you the whole story. So that's why I share that with you. All right, so Leah, if I can ask your help, can we pop up the poll? We have a couple of quick questions that we'd like to ask so that way I kind of have a good idea of all of we have so many participants right now, and some of you are together, and so we have even more participants total. So
Sure.
Leah, do we have the poll ready?
Okay, launching it.
Very good. So the first question is, please indicate, are you a full or part-time paraeducator? And then the second one is, how long have you been working at the Guam Department of Education? So that way I kind of get an idea.
So you would write this on the chat, your responses?
Oh, yes.
Go ahead and indicate it in the chat if you're a part-time or full-time paraeducator, as Dr. Kolade mentioned, and also how long have you been working with the Guam Department of Education?
Oh, 17 years.
Got some part-times, yeah. Wow, Austin, fabulous, 21 years, part-time 2 years, part-time 2 years, 5 months, 1 year, part-time 3 years, 4 years, 1 year. Daryl, 17 years, congratulations, thank you for doing that. 5 years, part-time for 1 year, for 4 years, 2 years. Part-time 1 year. So we've got some newbies. Oh, okay, Valerie, 8 years, fabulous. So we have part-time. Oh, Herminia, I hope I said your name correctly, 20 years. Floor, 17 years. Thank you so much. 5 years, 3 years, 2, 7, 6 months. Okay, we got some newbies, and that's good too. 19 years. Jason, wonderful. Well, you guys could tell some stories. We could all write a book together maybe someday. 8 months, 3 years. Half a year, Zach. Wonderful. 18 years full-time, Dora. Wow, that's terrific. Part-time, 10 months. So a lot of you are part-time. Okay. Full-time, part-time. Thank you so much. 4 months. 3 years.
It's hard to be full-time here.
It's hard to be full-time. I understand that completely. So Daniel, 22 years full-time. Christine, 17 years. Wow. Francis, 23 years. So we have a huge mix. Wow, we have a really good continuum of times. So very good. About 25 or more years. I know, Rosemary. At some point you get to a point where you're like, how many years was it? Somebody recently asked me how old my son was, and I couldn't tell him because he's in his 30s, and I shouldn't be the mother of a 30 plus something child. So part-time, 13 years, 3 years. Okay, so full-time 17. Oh, thank you for coming in, because I know that some of you are in a group together, and I think that's wonderful that you can. I wish I were there for part of your conversations. Rose for 10 years, 11 months, 9 months. So we have, wow, Trisha, 16 years, and Kathy, 30 years. Wow. So, all right. I think that gives me a good idea of, we have a really good collection of paraeducators from beginning to end. And again, like I said, someday wouldn't it be great for us to write a book about our experiences? So let me tell you a little bit about myself. Leah did a great job of reading you my bio. I absolutely love this quote. Leah and Michelle know that. It is by Parker Palmer, who wrote a book called The Courage to Teach. And in it, he said, you teach who you are. And so one of the things I want you to think about as paraeducators is, why do you do the job that you do? And who are you? And what do you bring to the job? Because this is a hard job. This is not a job for everyone. As Leah said, let's see, there we go. I got my bachelor's in special education from Old Dominion University. That's in Norfolk, Virginia. Okay, I'm going to date myself. I got it back in 1983, back when we in special ed really didn't know what we were doing. And so they gave me a degree, a bachelor's degree, to teach any child with any disability, pre-K through 12th grade, in any subject area. So I'll share with you that. My favorite story about that is that in my second teaching job, I was teaching chemistry to a group of 11 boys with oppositional defiance disorder. I wanted to be cool. So I asked the real chemistry teacher if he had a science experiment I could do in my classroom that would make me the cool teacher. And he gave me a beaker of white sugar and a flask of hydrochloric acid. It was really hot. And I was to pour the acid into the sugar, and he said, watch what happens. And he gave me the chemical equation. And so I brought it back to my classroom, and unfortunately he forgot to tell me to do it outside. So I did it inside. And any of you science people out there will know that what happens is that it turns into this big black snake that grows out of the flask. It's really cool, except that big black snake emits black smoke all over, and it's stuck to every surface in my classroom. And I actually shut the school down for the day. Fire department was called. I was living in Germany at that point, and our school was off base. And so the German fire department, I met the German fire department, and I met the American fire department. And my administrator wondered who they'd hired at that point. So the good news is we've gotten better. Your teachers that now teach should have content knowledge of what they're teaching. I then got my master's degree from Boston University. As you see on the screen, believe it or not, Boston University's mascot is a terrier. They literally make shirts that say "Fear the Terrier." And at Boston, I got my degree in early childhood education because it made so much sense. those of you who are early childhood paraeducators know that really one of the big pushes is for us to be developmentally appropriate, to take kids where they are developmentally and teach them there. And so it made perfect sense. As Leah said, I earned national board certification in 2001. I renewed in 2011. And as Leah said, I'm renewing now. I would appreciate any thoughts and prayers because it's a tough process. I then decided to get my PhD in special education. As Leah said, I also wear a different hat. I am a family member. This is my brother Michael on the screen. I literally talked to him a half an hour ago before our session. I talk to him on weekends twice a day. Michael lives in a group home in the Washington, D.C. area. That's where my parents lived. I will refer back to Michael a lot. Michael, when Parker Palmer said, "You teach who you are," he meant it. And Michael is the reason I teach who I am. I carry my mom on one shoulder and Michael on the other when I view anything when it has to do with teaching individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. He is my best friend and he also makes me absolutely crazy sometimes. Please keep him in your thoughts. We're moving him into a new group home, and as most of you know, who know and love individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, they and we don't deal well with change. And so I said to Michael the other day, he's in the group home that he's been in for 6 years and he's waiting for the new group home to open. And so he knows he's moving. And I said, one of his housemates is just making a lot of noise. And I said, Michael, go into your room and turn your music on. And he goes, I can't, I packed it. And I said, unpack it so that way you can put your headphones on. This is a picture of my classroom. It was in the last class I taught. I taught at Enid High School for 15 years, taught students with severe disabilities. You name the disability category, and I had that in my classroom in one of those 15 years. I will tell you that in this picture that you see on the screen between Michael and my orange picture, they are my students. And in the last year that I taught, every year we took on a project. And this particular year, we took on the Oklahoma City Bombing Memorial Marathon. They hold that every May. And they hold a kids marathon where you walk 25 miles prior to the day of the marathon. And then the day of the marathon, you do a 1.2. Now, if you can tell from that picture, in Oklahoma in May, you never know what the weather's going to be like, probably kind of like in Guam. And it was 44 degrees and raining sideways. And all of my students and all of my paras showed up and we walked a 1.2. It was a scene out of the Rocky movie. It was absolutely fabulous. What I loved, and I will share this with you throughout the next 10 hours, is that every year that I taught, I had between 4 and 6 paraeducators in my classroom. They were the lifeblood of my classroom. They made my classroom work. And that's why I'm so dedicated to these next 10 hours with you all. As Leah said, I then went on to Oklahoma State University and started teaching in the early childhood education program. I taught there for 10 years. Here's a picture of my students. We were actually doing a presentation on inclusion literature and how important inclusion literature is, and reading books by people either with a disability or a family member of a person with a disability. And if you ever want to know the list, I'm happy to share it with you. If you work with students with specific disabilities, especially ones that have ones that are fairly rare. I had a student who had what is called Lowe syndrome. Never heard of that before. And so it was really important for me to read up on it. I think it's really important. And again, we live in a world of, you can Google it, and most disability categories have some type of an association you can get on with. And then finally, I've just started as the state leadership program manager at Oklahoma Able Tech. I feel like I finally found my home. And I am helping support state educators as they use assistive technology for people with disabilities. So that's who I am, kind of in a nutshell. All right, so today, I don't know why there's a 20 on the screen, and so please ignore that. With our next 10 hours, what we're basically going to be doing is looking at technology and how we use it and how we support students with special needs. The very first thing I want to leave you with is assistive technology for your students, and especially you all are one-on-ones with students, which means that those students are identified with having disabilities to such an extent that in order for them to be included in as much as possible with the general education classes or to be successful wherever they are in the school, they're going to need support. And obviously you are a huge part of that support. Assistive technology can also be part of that support. And it's not just a good idea. Next slide, I'll tell you why. Today, we're also going to look at the categories of assistive technology. There are 8 of them that GSAT, the assistive technology program in Guam.
Sorry, can you resend the link?
The link for, what link do you need? If you put
The
it
one
in
from Trip.
Okay, if you put it in on the chat, Leah, can you help with it? Thank you. All right, so it's, yes, you are most welcome, and thank you for asking. Okay, it's not just a good idea, everybody, it's the law. And I hate to say, let's stay out of court. You know, my standard statement to my paraeducators every year was, let's stay out of the newspapers. Let's do what we need to be doing for our students. And so we need to understand that basically there are 4 federal laws that address the fact that assistive technology, and we'll talk about what assistive technology is, that assistive technology is basically any type of technology that can support a child to access information, participation with their peers, and be able to be an active member of the classroom. And you as paras will hold a really important position in that, because you're with them all day long. And so you see where their needs are. And this will be, as we go through the 10 days or the 10 hours, not 10 days, we have 5 days, 2 hours each day, you're going to find that I'm going to give you some tools to be able to express your opinion in a professional manner to your teachers, to your special ed teachers, to be able to say, hey, you know what, I learned about this in a workshop, and what do you think? So these are the 4 laws, and we're going to go into them a little bit more tomorrow. But the first one is the Assistive Technology Act of 2004. Realize that's what the Guam AT Act program is founded on. That's what Oklahoma Able Tech is founded on. Every single state or territory under the USA's umbrella must have, okay, it's saying my internet is unstable. I'm hoping it's going to come back. Hopefully you can hear me now. The AT Act of 2004 basically established that every single state or territory must have an office that provides information about assistive technology, allows you to borrow assistive technology for free for up to 30 days, and then you can trial it before you then can make a case to buy it. And so they provide both the devices, and then they also provide services. That's how I'm here tonight, is because of the Assistive Technology Act of 2004. The second one you all are probably familiar with, and if you haven't heard of it, boy golly, let me be the first to introduce you to. It's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or the IDEA. Now, back in 1975, when it was first signed into law, it was actually called the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. Now you can see where that, those words really aren't necessarily appropriate. And so we've, over the couple of years since 1975, we've revisited the act a couple of times. And we now have the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is what requires students who, or what requires school systems to identify students who may need additional support. You all would be fall underneath that. The third one is Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I don't know if on Guam they're celebrating, but today is the 31st anniversary. of the ADA in Guam. It's July 26th. It was signed into law July 26, 1990. And basically, Americans with Disabilities Act says, let's level the playing field. Let's make sure that we have curb cuts so that people that use wheelchairs for mobility can get into facilities. Let's make sure that they're to the best of their ability, they can make sure that new buildings that are built take into account every single person who might have a disability. There's a fabulous video out, and I think it's on Netflix, and it's called Darius Goes West. And it's Darius, D-A-R-I-U-S, Darius Goes West, and he's a young man with muscular dystrophy. And it's really actually kind of a fun movie to watch because he is kind of befriended by this group of college students or young adults, and they go across the country and they raise awareness for the Americans with Disabilities Act. And also they're actually going, their goal is to get his wheelchair tricked out by Pimp My Ride. And so it's a fabulous video, but in it, they take him to Carlsbad Caverns, which is in New Mexico. And Carlsbad Caverns followed the Americans with Disabilities Act requirements and made it so that any person in a wheelchair can actually go through Carlsbad Caverns and be a spelunker for the day. And basically that's what Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act says, is we need to make sure that your kiddos can get into their classrooms and that they can get up to their tables and that they can fully participate in the activities that are going on. And then finally, Section 504 of the Rehab Act of 1973 is a little bit muddy. The Section 504 is for kiddos who don't fall under the IDEA for educational services. But it does impact and says that if a student needs assistive technology, we need to give it to them. All right, let's talk about the categories of AT. And again, I'm sorry, I don't know where this 20 is coming from. Okay, there are 8 categories that GSAT has identified as being categories that they have devices that you can borrow. Realize that even that anyone who knows or loves or is a person with a disability can borrow a device, again, for up to 30 days to trial it and see if it works. And I think that one of the best parts about this AT Act program and setting up this ability to borrow devices is that you may be in the classroom and be thinking, my student's really having a problem with writing. Maybe there's something out there that can help. You can contact GSAT and they'll help hook you up with somebody who'll give you some ideas for how to get the student on the computer, how to get them being able to write in such a way that it's not labor intensive on their part, that they're able to get their thoughts on paper. Do you see what I'm saying? That if you see that your student is struggling with something, you can, now I would certainly encourage you to collaborate with your special ed teacher and to say, I relied on my paras at all times to tell me, what does my student need? And because they're with them, not just in my class, but they're with them in PE, they're with them in our life skills program, they were with them in the cafeteria. Now I worked lunch too, so I was in the cafeteria right along with them. But so the 8 categories that are identified by GSAT are computer related. Now, computer related can be anything from, and what's great is we live in such a world of technology that there are fabulous things already built into the computers that are coming out. Now, if you have an old computer, maybe they're not. But if it's a newer computer, they're already there, such as speech to text, that you can speak, and it will Dragon Naturally Speaking is a program where you speak and it will then convert it into text. There's also text to speech where your computer can read it to you. So if you have a student, say in social studies, that is having to read a passage, they can put on some headphones or some ear pods and have the computer read it to them. So you don't have to read it to them. One of my goals with assistive technology was to put myself out of business, to get my students to be as independent as possible. Along with computer related, there are all kinds of switches, or you know, I don't know, we call them mice, is the plural of a mouse, that there are all kinds of mouse devices that are big for kiddos who need a larger one. Some of them have a roller ball on them. They're absolutely fabulous, and I'll show you some. Daily living is such an important category of assistive technology, because you all know, I'm preaching to the choir here. You all know that you don't just teach academics to your students. You're in the lunchroom with them. You're making sure that their coat is zipped up. You're making sure their shoes are tied. And so daily living is a category that we as in the education field have absolutely got to address with our students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Environmental adaptations, I'll show you some ideas for those. Certainly, if you have a student who has a hearing impairment, there are lots of things we can do for that. Mobility, seating, and positioning is a huge category. And we all know that too from just, I mean, how many of us have sat at a desk for a long period of time? We know that our seating and positioning is important. Number 6 is rec, sports, and leisure. I hope your kids are included in PE, and if they're not, let's spend some time talking about how we can get them included in being able to participate. And how about recess as well? 7, of course, you heard in my bio, 7 is my wheelhouse and my love. Bottom line, the way I feel about speech communication is this: if a child cannot, and those of you who are paraeducators with kiddos with what is now termed, you know, because we can never keep a term the same in special education. We now call students who are either nonverbal or have difficulty communicating verbally, we identify them as having what is called complex communication needs. Okay, funny side story. My brother, Michael, has severe intellectual disabilities. And back, you know, before, we used to say that Michael had severe mental retardation. Now we've stopped using that term for a lot of good reasons why we don't use that anymore. But please realize that that's what I grew up with Michael. Michael is my older brother. I know not one day in my life without Michael being part of it. And so when I was in my classroom teaching is when we switched from saying that our students had mental retardation to saying they had intellectual disabilities. And so I called my mom and I said, "Mom, guess what? Michael is no longer mentally retarded." And my mother was from the South. She was from Atlanta. And she was so cute because she goes, "Well, honey, he was this morning." And I think that that truly sums up the way we should view categories, is that let's get to know our kids and their abilities much more so than their categories. But my brother has a severe speech. He has complex communication needs, which is, again, going back to the you teach who you are. And then finally, vision. If you have kiddos, and you all will be the, you know how we call, you know, in the medical terms, we call them frontline workers. You all are the frontline workers for our students. You will be the ones noticing, are they really struggling to see the material that is either being presented up on the board or being presented to them in front on paper? And so we'll look at some vision things. Here are a couple of quick examples of computer related. You can see on both sides of the screen, I decided to show you 2 different mouse devices. One is kind of like a joystick. And you can see the big trackball. I actually had both of these in my classroom. And again, you need to get to know your students. This is
everybody talking. You turn on my light.
so important because you can borrow these mouse devices from GSAT and try them with your kiddos. They plug right into the computer just like another mouse does. And so go on and look at their inventory and say, I think this one might work. What I love about the borrowing program is this: you try before you buy. Can you see where when you make the case for, hey, we need to buy this, that it's a lot stronger of a request if you can say, I've borrowed the device and it works beautifully with the child. The Smart Pen, will take what you're writing and put it onto a device. And then certainly iPads are huge with computer related devices. They can do lots of different things. One of the things that I want you to keep in mind with these different categories is that they overlap, because you'll see iPads again when we get to speech and communication. Some daily living examples. These are some things that fall under daily living. The Jumbo desktop calculator. Can you see where if you have a student who is in a math class, and it doesn't matter if it's, you know, an elementary math class all the way up through high school, if they need a calculator to help them be able to arrive at the correct answer, a Jumbo desktop calculator might be the best thing for them because the keys are bigger. I always joke that my brother has big man hands. My brother has very poor fine motor coordination. If he were going to use a calculator, he would need a Jumbo one for accuracy, to make sure he's pressing the correct buttons. Now, there are also talking calculators. I'll tell you that as a teacher and as a paraeducator, they will be your least favorite assistive technology device. I used to have students who would, I taught high school. I had students who would make the talking calculators rap. They would just keep saying 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, and then they would lose the right to have it be talking. And so we would have to teach them, this is how you use a talking calculator. If you only use it if you need that auditory feedback. The letter writing guide goes on top of a piece of paper and helps the student be able to physically write in a set format, so that way they don't go all over the paper. This is one that is very, very easy to implement and to carry around with you. I'm sure you as a paraeducator, I bet you all have a backpack that you carry stuff that you need for your student. Can you see where if a student needed even a large desktop calculator, that those could be things that either the student could transport with them or that you could, and a letter writing guide certainly is an easy one. The adaptive loop scissors, realize that there are all kinds of adaptive scissors that you can use. Adaptive loop scissors help a student be able to press and control, because then they open back up. Do you see how having the bottom on it helps them open back up, so the student is not necessarily having to do that? So if you have someone with weak fine motor control, can you see where adaptive loop scissors would be very beneficial for a student? So again, I encourage you to, because especially if you're a one-on-one, you're the expert on that student. Go on to the GSAT website and take a look at what they have that you could borrow. Environmental adaptations, predominantly what I'm showing you are switches. A switch is something that can be plugged on into anything that has an on-off switch. Okay, so that can include, okay, I know I'm dating myself, but like a CD player. This can also be, the wobble switch can be plugged into a computer, and it can be used as a clicker, that it can click things. And so the wobble, I love the wobble switch. I actually have had all 3 of these in my classroom again. I love the wobble switch. I had a student who had spastic cerebral palsy. She used a wheelchair for mobility and relied on others for everything. She had meaningful movement solely in her left kind of upper arm, but definitely that left index finger. Man, she could do pretty much anything with that left index finger. And so I got her a wobble switch, and then we were able to download some programs on the computer that were puzzle programs, that if she hit that wobble switch, the puzzle pieces would come in and would form a puzzle. She loved animals, so we found every animal puzzle there was out on the web and had her do them, so that way she could, that is what she would work for whenever we weren't working on academic activities. A jelly bean switch is merely a 1-button switch that you hit. It acts like a wobble switch, but instead you just have to put your hand on it. I think you can see where that's a difference between the wobble, where she was able to just swipe it with her finger. Now, she probably could have touched the jelly bean switch, but the wobble switch, she didn't have to reach her arm so far down on the on her tray, on her wheelchair. And then finally, the head switch. A key thing for those of you who support the needs of students with very limited motor abilities is find out what they have full control over. Again, with my little one, I discovered that she had really good control over that left index finger. And my favorite story about that I'll tell, I love telling stories, so please bear with me. My favorite story with that is whenever I first got her, I was pushing her wheelchair to the cafeteria. I'd given her paraeducator her one-on-one the day off. And so, because we'd had a rough day the day before, and so I was taking her to lunch, and you know, I didn't think it through. I didn't ask her if I could put my lunch bag on her tray and push her to the cafeteria. So I put my lunch bag on her tray and I'm pushing her to the cafeteria, and I didn't notice, but suddenly my lunch bag fell off her tray. And there was a little part of me that thought maybe it vibrated off. So I put it back up, but then I watched. She reached her little arm out, took that finger and pushed my lunch bag off of her tray. And I stopped in the middle of the hallway and I, you know, got down on her level, eye to eye, and I apologized and said, I am really sorry. Can you please tell me? And she would look up for yes and down for no. I said, can you please tell me can I please put my lunch bag on your tray? And she looked down and said no. And I was like, not a problem. I'll carry it myself. I'll figure it out. So important that we always presume, number one, that our students are competent, and then number two, figure out a way that they can communicate. So in her case, that's how I figured out that one little finger could move the world. And by golly, now we were going to do it. With the head switch, now I had a student who used the head switch, and she would use it on her communication device to move it to the spots where she would talk. Also had a student who had spastic cerebral palsy. His switch wasn't a head switch, it was a knee switch. He had complete control over his right knee. And so we put the switch on his knee. So I challenge you that if you're working with kiddos with limited motor ability, figure out what they have control over. You know, spend the time to talk with them, have them show you, and definitely watch them. Hearing examples. These are ones that will amplify the sounds. Now, if you have a student who is in a general ed classroom or in a special ed classroom where there is a lot of large group instruction, we need to be working on how do we make sure that our kiddos with hearing impairments are able to hear what's being said. And so the pocket talker is one where the teacher would wear it around their neck, and then the student would wear it around their ears, and it would go straight to the student. Sound FM systems can work very similarly. There are also teachers who can use FM systems for the whole class to benefit. What I want you to realize with assistive technology is that sometimes it helps students that aren't identified with disabilities, but who need the support too. And so if you have a student with a hearing impairment, please consider looking into some hearing assistive technology devices. Mobility, seating, and positioning examples, certainly, and these are two things that you can actually borrow from GSAT. If you have a student who's in a wheelchair, please take the time, please take the time to learn how to adjust them in the wheelchair. And this is where you would work with your physical therapist and your occupational therapist too, but mainly your PT, on how do I make sure my student's comfortable all day long? Make sure the chair stays clean. A lot of times with our kiddos who use wheelchairs for mobility, they're eating in those wheelchairs too. Those of us who are parents, you know, anytime you've ever pulled that car seat out of the car in front of friends and you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe how dirty it is. Same thing happens with our kiddos with wheelchairs, only they're living in those wheelchairs. You know, imagine if you had a child living in their car seat 16 hours a day. We would want to make sure that they're clean, so learn how to take care of them. And then certainly there are tons of different walkers out there. And when you look at this walker, I know that we tend to think of the person walking towards the bar in it. I had a student who had spastic cerebral palsy, and she used a walker for mobility. But what she kept doing is she would push the walker out in front of her, and she would get out of what the PT called the box. The box is when you're into the walker. It's in right next to you. She would push it way out, which really didn't help with her balance. She fell frequently. And so what we ended up doing, because we're smart and we're asking questions, is we borrowed from our AT ACT program a walker that is backwards, that would go behind her so that she couldn't push it out in front of her. So much better, and her falling incidences went down significantly. Rec and leisure, rec sports and leisure, please, please, please don't accept that your student with disabilities that you're a one-on-one with, it's okay for them to sit out during PE and participate by watching. Please be thinking at all times, how can my kiddo get in there? How can they be part of the action in the classroom? Because a lot of things happen in PE, and one of the main things is socialization, that kids see that their peers that maybe in class can't keep up academically might be able to do some pretty cool things out on the physical education court. This is a motorized scooter board that you can borrow from GSAT. For your kiddos, you can see that the switch that activates it is for this young man under his chin. But can you see where if you had a student who had the range of mobility where they could put their hands on it, they could operate it that way? The other one is a ringing soccer volleyball, so that way you hear it coming towards you, so that if you have a student who visually can't necessarily process things, there's a thing called cortical visual impairment. And while my brother hasn't been diagnosed with that formally, I truly believe he has it, because that's where you can't process things visually quickly. When he and I get separated in a store, and if there's a group of people around us, he can't find me visually. He can find me auditorily. If I say we have an embarrassing thing that we do, but we stick out anyway, so I don't care. But Michael will yell out, woohoo! And then I yell back to him, woohoo! And then he orients to where I am. Same thing with the ringing soccer volleyball. You might have kids that'll look at the ball, or at least look towards it, so that way they know it's coming towards them. And so please look into and talk to your PE teacher. Now realize that general PE teachers don't necessarily have the training in assistive technology. So you may have to reach out and ask for help from others who can give you some ideas on how to get your kid off the bench. Again, my huge thing are speech and communication examples. What you see on the right, the Logan Crosstalker communicator, that has just little pictures, or we call them icons, that say certain things. Now, what I want you all to realize is that both of these examples are what are called speech-generated devices. Let's go back to the Americans with Disabilities Act. The Americans with Disabilities Act specifically says all students must have the ability to communicate in the same way as students without communication disabilities. So what that honestly means is they need to be able to talk. They need to remember my student that looked up and looked down. That was when I first got her. And that's what she had been using in the classroom before I got her. By the time she left me, she was using speech generated devices, because we wanted to hear her voice. And so the Logan Crosstalker communicator is one where the student would press those. You can see that's a little bit limited because you only have 5 things they can say, right? But if you take a look at it, it's Velcroed. So you, as the paraeducator, would have a notebook full of stuff with pictures on it that you could then whip out and reprogram. This is a device that you flip it over, and on the other side, you would be able to program in the voice. Now, my challenge for you to think about anytime you're programming in a voice, because we have different gender paraeducators on today. We have women and we have men. What you need to realize, women, is if you are a paraeducator for a young man, you need to make sure it's a young man's voice. Okay, so you need to find somebody to be your voice. If you are a male and you're being asked to do it, I hope that you will. You can see the Go Talk next to it is a little bit higher level technological advice or device. What it does is, if you look where on the side where there's like a thumbprint, it says shop. Those are actual pages that you can put in. What's great about the Go Talk 9 Plus is on the back, you can actually program 9 different pages, and then you flip a switch so that, you know, when you want to talk about if you're going to go shopping in the community, that this is the one we're going to put in. If you see at the top where it's the white around it, those will stay on at all times. Those will be the same for each one of the pages you put in. So this is where the student that's carrying it, and do you see how it's really easy to carry? It's got a handle on it. Can greet someone. They can say, I have a question, and then they can say, see you later. So absolutely, you know, it's a step up from the Logan. And then finally, if you go to the GSAT website, they have iPads that have these apps on it, communication apps that are even higher tech from it. Can you see the importance for training, that you all need to be trained on it? And I'll share with you that with on the last day that we're together, I'm going to be sharing stories with you about my research using different devices. And one of the things I found was that we had a young man who started with a Go Talk 9 Plus, and we moved him onto an iPad. And the reason we did is because the paraeducator said he has so much more to say. Can we not please put him on something that allows him to say more? And that's what an iPad with a communication app can do. Go Talk 9 Pluses are a good place to start to teach students. You can see too on the Go Talk 9 Plus, the difference between it and the Logan is that, can you see where the frame is raised? So that way when they go to push the shoes, I want to shop for shoes, that there's a box around there that helps their finger be able to hit it more accurately. Finally, our vision examples. JAWS for Windows is an app that you can put on that will read the text from the computer to your student. You can borrow the JAWS program, plug it in, try it, see if it works for your student, and then again, make the suggestion that the school purchase it for them. Braille Note, if your students are using Braille, I hope that you're going to learn Braille. I will share with you all that in my new job, well, let me back up. When I was in Enid, teaching in Enid, the second year I was teaching there, we had a student join my program who was cortically blind. She had absolutely no vision whatsoever. She had been born as a preemie. She had severe intellectual disabilities. She was, again, cortically blind. And are you ready? She hated to touch anything. She was what we call tactily defensive. She didn't want to touch anything, and she certainly didn't want you touching her. And so I called our Oklahoma School for the Blind and said, I need help. You know, I have never worked with a student with these intense vision needs. They came out and helped me figure out how I could work with her. And now I think it's come full circle. Now that I'm at Oklahoma Able Tech, I am going through the Oklahoma School for the Blind Vision Teacher for the Visually Impaired training. I just started. I spent 2 days there last month, and I'm learning Braille. Basically, on the screen, this humanware that you see, the 3 buttons around the circle are for the Braille, for making Braille letters. And so, and it would then transfer onto a document. You can actually, believe it or not, in most Windows programs, especially the new Windows programs, if you look under fonts, it will have Braille there, and it will print out Braille for you. Now, it certainly will not raise the dots for you. So visually impaired students won't learn it or won't be able to feel it. However, you might be able to learn some Braille that way. So lots of vision examples. Okay, take a deep breath. We're going to talk about collaborative team processes, and there are a couple of things that I want to emphasize here. The first is that you are a member of the individual education plan team. All right, you are a member. Now, the question then becomes, what is your role as that member? What I highly encourage you to do, especially our new ones, and even for our veterans that are on, if you have a new teacher or a teacher that you've worked with for a long time, I think it's okay to, it certainly depends on the presentation that you bring to the person, but to be able to say, I've gone to this training, I understand that I have a role on the IEP team. Can you help me understand what my role is? Now, for me, every time I held an IEP meeting, if I had a one-on-one para with a student that I was holding an IEP team meeting on, that para was at the meeting. My para educators came to every meeting and would be part of the present level performance. They would talk about the objectives we were working on. They would be able to share things that even I couldn't share because I wasn't with the student all the time. Some teachers are comfortable with that, some teachers are not. However, I think it would be really important that even if your teacher is saying, no, you need to be with the student, not in an IEP meeting, because we know most IEP meetings occur during school. And where are you supposed to be during school but with the student? But we all know we can get coverage. And two, then that leads to the question, should the student be at the IEP meeting? I have always, as an educator, had the very firm belief in the saying, nothing about me without me. I want to have the student there so that way they are hearing what we're saying and they understand what our goals are for the next year. They understand what our concerns are, and they also understand what we're celebrating that occurred in the last year. So if your student goes to the meeting, does it not make perfect sense that you would go as well? But if not, and sometimes it's not. I had a student with Fragile X syndrome who was highly volatile in her behaviors, and her parents, the student wasn't 18 yet, the parents asked that the student not come to the meetings. Okay, I can understand and respect the parents' wishes. But in most cases, hopefully the student will be at the meeting. But bottom line, your role on the team is important. And number one, if you leave this 10-hour training with nothing else, that's what I want you to leave with is your role on the team is important because you spend more time with the student than anyone else does. The second thing I'm going to suggest to be part of the collaborative team processes is that you ask your special education teacher for access to the parts of the IEP that you will be responsible for. Okay, I'm about to walk you through my research that I did for my dissertation, and I'm going to tell you some stories about paras. But for now, what I'm going to tell you is this. You need to know what the goals are. Hopefully, you're helping document the progress towards the goals. All right. That it should not just be, now the teacher is absolutely in charge of setting up the goals and the objectives to meet the goals, and then giving you the materials and having you teach the child. The issue though is, it's important for you to know what are the written goals, what am I supposed to be working on with the student, okay? So very important. I want you to keep that in mind because in a little bit, I'm going to tell you a story about one fabulous paraeducator. Now, another thing that you absolutely have got to take into account with collaborative team processes is this. I wish if you're lucky, well, no, because you probably none of you are. If you are in, because we've moved away from truly self-contained classrooms where a student stays with just one teacher and you all day long. The key is what I've just said you need to do with your special ed teacher, you need to do for every single teacher that you encounter. And so what that means is that you have got to clarify your role with the certified faculty. So if you're in the special education classroom, you need to say to the teacher, and you know, the nice part is we're meeting in July, so this is before school starts, so that hopefully you'll have a day in the classroom prior to the students arriving where you can say, when I'm in the classroom with you, what are your expectations of me? To be very honest, just like I said about, you know, my student that I gave the para the day off, she actually still came to work. She just wasn't with her one-on-one student. As a one-on-one para, you are very, very important in the life of that child. However, something that was my philosophy as a teacher was, I don't want the student to always depend on you. The student needs to have relationships with others in the classroom. And so in my classroom, I would mix it up, except that, remember the student that I found out, you know, had the one very strong control over her left index finger. She had some significant health concerns. God bless her. She had what are called startle-induced seizures. If any of you work with students with a seizure disorder, boy, you need to be well trained in how to support that student during a seizure and then certainly after a seizure. And so that particular para, when we met to clarify her role, said, you know, I'm willing to work with my student and maybe one more student, but I always want to work with my student. I always want to be close to her because of these startle-induced seizures. And so I respected that. But for my other one-on-one paras, we tried to kind of move them around a little bit, because you all as a one-on-one para, you have a right to get sick, right? You have I think personal leave days that you can take. My paras had 3 personal leave days they could take every year. Certainly they had to plan for them and let us know. But then we would have to have a substitute or somebody fill in. We rarely had substitutes, please. I understand that, but you see what I'm saying, that you are not always going to be that one person. So definitely in the special ed classroom, to say, what do you expect? Should I be with the student all day long? I will tell you that for clarifying roles, what I did tell my one-on-one paras is I called you all the 911 paras. And what I mean by that is, if the fire alarm goes off, you need to be with your one-on-one student. I don't have time. I've got 17 other students I've got to take care of. Okay, that is when you absolutely positively. So I clarified that with them the day before school would start. Certainly we live in a day and age of, we have other threats to the classroom. When we have those threats, you need to make sure that you have your hands on your one-on-one student that you're assigned to. Now I'm hoping you can, you know, we all have 2 hands, that you're going to grab somebody else too and help me shepherd them to safety. For the general ed teacher, this is huge, because what you need to realize in your role as a paraeducator, and for my veteran paraeducators, I'm sure that you can nod your heads if I could see you all. One of the key things that we never want to do, either as a teacher of a kiddo with a disability or a paraeducator of a kid with a disability, is we don't want to become a barrier to them interacting with their peers, right? And so that's where you need to ask the general educator, where do you want me to sit? What do you want me to do to support the student? While I taught students with severe disabilities for my entire career, I was asked in the last 3 years of my teaching to be the teacher of record for a student with high functioning autism. He had Asperger's, and he had a one-on-one para because he would go out into all general education classes throughout the day. My classroom was his safe room. So he would go out with his para to history. And when he got the assignment, if he just didn't want to stay in the classroom, he would come to my classroom to finish it. So the para had to work with both of us. She had to work with me, with my expectations, but she also had to work with the students' general ed teachers. And she would ask them, do you want me sitting next to my student? Do you want me to sit in the back of the classroom? And then hopefully hopefully, if you have a good teacher, a general ed teacher, they're going to say to you, well, you know the student better. What do you think you should be doing? And I hope that you will appropriately, even if not asked that, be able to share that opinion and what your thoughts are about it. I'll tell you that depending on the classroom that my student with Asperger's was in, the para either sat right next to him or she sat in the back of the classroom. In math, she didn't even sit anywhere near him. He didn't need her to. In social studies, he wanted to make, his family really monitored what he watched on TV. And so he was pretty much only allowed to watch the History Channel. So he felt like he was an expert on the History Channel. And those of you all who either know, love, or are one-on-ones with students with autism know that sometimes they tend to have a pretty focused topic that they know a lot about. And he knew a lot about World War II history. So when he was in the class that talked about American history during World War II, he wanted to correct the teacher on things. And so the paraeducator worked with the general ed teacher, and she would sit next to him so he could lean over and whisper in her ear what the teacher said that was wrong. And that helped him get that out of his system, but also helped the relationship with the teacher and his peers in the classroom. Certainly, if you're going into a PE class, and it's not an adaptive PE class, so you're not going in with a teacher who is a special ed PE teacher, this is where you need to ask the PE teacher, how can I help you? How can I help my student get off the bench? Our goal is to not have a student go to PE and sit on the bench. Okay, we want them to, in some way, shape, or form, be involved. And then finally, the music teacher. If you're lucky enough to have music, certainly ask your music teacher. So do you see where I'm saying, when you get your schedule, you need to be saying, what do I do? Now, let's think too, remember how we talked about daily living? Where, if you're a one-on-one and you're not sure about lunch, what do you do at lunch? Again, you don't want to be a barrier to a student talking with their friends during lunch. If they're and so I think it's so important that you ask your special ed teacher, hey, what do you think about me sitting at a table next to them? Letting them pick where they sit, and then hopefully encouraging some peers without disabilities to sit with them, or their peers with disabilities to sit with them. The only para-educators in my program, again, I had between 4 and 6 every year. We would sit at a teacher table, and the only students who sat with us were the students who needed to be fed. And once we had fed those students, we would push them up to a table with their peers, so that way they could at least, you know, listen to conversations of their peers and not have to be only listening to adult conversations. So clarify what your role is so that you are truly a collaborative member of the team. All right, I'm going to tell you 4 stories. We're going to end with some stories tonight. When I started my dissertation, I decided that I would look into how teams of educators, and when I say teams of educators, I include you all on that team, how teams of educators would support students with complex communication needs, so students who could not communicate verbally, how all of the adults would work together to support the child to be able to communicate. And so I want to tell you some stories about the 4 students. And the names I'm using are not the students' names, they're pseudonyms or fake names, but their stories are very, very true. All right, and I hope that they resonate with you. And what I'll tell you is this, I looked at 4 different groups of educators, teams of educators, and I found 4 very different collaborative processes that are going on. And I'll kind of walk you through the challenges that the paraeducators had in them, and maybe make some recommendations that if you're in that situation, that what could you do? So let me introduce you first to Annie. Annie, at the time of my dissertation, was 8 years old. She had Down syndrome. She has Down syndrome. She alternated between a special ed classroom and a general ed classroom. She went to PE with her peers without disabilities. She went to speech therapy. And so let me back that up too. On your collaborative team processes, the question becomes, if they go to therapy, what do you do? Do you go with them? Do you not go with them? This is a collaborative team decision that needs to be made. Honestly, I can see both sides. However, I think it's really, really important that you as the paraeducator who knows everything about the student, number one, needs to share what you know with that therapist, because realize that a speech and language therapist might have 72 kids on their caseload, and they see your kid twice a week for 20 minutes a day. Okay, how can they possibly get to know that student, right? And so, do you see where your role is so important to share? Hey, this is how I think they're communicating, right? So I think that you need to go sometimes, maybe not all the time. Honestly, it was my experience in the classroom that a lot of times my paraeducators, they would use that as their break times. And I understand how important break is. We want you guys to stay sane. We want you to come back tomorrow. So sometimes breaks are good. Okay, so Annie went to speech and language therapy. And now this is how mom, I started every interview with the moms, because realize what I did is I interviewed. I'm not a numbers person. I'm a stories person. I think you all have picked that up by now. And so I would always ask the parent whenever I first started interviewing them, please tell me about your child. So the mom said that Annie is an opportunist, that she could run for mayor. I think you all probably know students like that they could run your classrooms, right? She's very loud. She's very cunning. And mom said, Annie is a Marine. She learns, she adapts, and she moves on. And what she meant by that was she would figure out what your button was to make you leave her alone, and she would push it so that way you would leave her alone. The acronym stands for Private Speech and Language Pathologist. And what she said was, Annie is so smart. She is very smart. And then the paraeducator said, she knows more words to say than what she's saying, that she had a lot more to say. Now, Annie's 8 years old. Annie could speak. She had some words that she said very clearly, nowhere near a meaningful communication level. And mom's biggest concern at the age of 8 was speech is the only thing holding that child back. And I made this really big and I made it bold. She said, our window is getting very small. She was very scared that if Annie didn't start using language to communicate soon, that she never would. And again, the private speech and language pathologist was speaking as though she were Annie, like she was in Annie's shoes, to explain Annie's challenging behaviors. And what she said Annie would like to say to all of us is, you people have been around me and not understood me for 5 years, and I'm sick of it. Annie had a lot of challenging behaviors at 8 years old. She would throw things when she got frustrated. She would run. I always joke that even now that I'm out of the classroom, I still view every pair of shoes that I buy as shoes that I can either kick off and run in or run in. That was our Annie. And I'll tell you a story about Annie that occurred while I was doing these interviews. At that time, my oldest granddaughter was 8 years old. And so same age as Annie, and I was going to interview the private speech and language pathologist. This was the one she saw outside of school. She had a speech and language pathologist in school, and then she had a private one through Medicare. And so I was taking my granddaughter, though, to a babysitter so I could go to the interview. And I drove through McDonald's. And my 8-year-old granddaughter, who does not have complex communication needs, said, Mimi, remember, I don't like mustard on my cheeseburger. So when I went through the line, I said, you know, we want a cheeseburger, you know, a kid's meal cheeseburger with no mustard, please. So I get to meet with the private speech and language pathologist, and she was saying that Annie was beginning to have meltdowns in McDonald's. And the private speech and language person said, what kid has a meltdown in McDonald's? Kids should be happy to be at a McDonald's. And it truly led me to tears. I said, kids with complex communication needs who don't want mustard on their cheeseburger have meltdowns. How many of us have gone through a drive-through and gotten something and said, I want it with no onions or no whatever, and then we get it with that on it? That makes us upset, doesn't it? Now imagine the child you're working with not being able to tell you, I don't want mustard, or I don't want onions. And so that was Annie. So now, okay, I know this is a complicated picture, but what it basically says, look at in the center of it is, okay, hang on a sec, because now I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, hang on, that was C. We need A. Let me find, there's A. Okay, here's Annie. Annie, basically what you see is Annie was A, and then here's the team. The team is in kind of the peach color. And so we had the mom, we had the paraeducator, we had the SPED teacher, a general ed teacher, and then 2 speech and language pathologists, private one and a school one. The green tells you what were they doing to teach Annie how to talk, okay? What I want you to look at is, first let's look at mom. Mom thought the key was signing, that if she could teach Annie to sign, that Annie would be better. Okay, now signing is good, and if you know some sign language, terrific. There are lots of websites you can go to learn it, to teach some basic ones to help with communication if you have a student with communication issues. However, my challenge to you to think about is, number one, does everybody understand sign language? So if that child uses sign language with the lunch lady who doesn't know sign language, is that going to be, you know, a meaningful way for them to communicate? But so, okay, so as we go around the green, bottom line, take a look at the paraeducator. The paraeducator wanted Annie speaking because, remember her quote, she said, Annie has a lot to say that she's not saying. She also used what are called PECS, which is Picture Exchange Communication System. If you haven't received training in PECS and you're working with a student to support them in communication, I encourage you to talk to your teacher about the Picture Exchange Communication System. Now remember that the ADA says they need to have communication at the same level as their peers. To be honest, PECS doesn't meet that, but it is a beginning. It's a beginning to help them be able to communicate using pictures. And so the para was using that plus speaking. Now you'll notice though, that the para had no training. No one had given that para training. This is why I admire, and as I said at the very beginning of tonight, this is why I just sit in awe of the fact that I'm with you all for the next 5 days. You all are frontline workers. You need to have information about how you can help a student, and especially with assistive technology, how you can help them. So what I loved about this particular para, Annie's para had worked with her for 4 years, 4 of the 5 years. Annie had started school at 3, and then went to preschool. You know, preschool was 3 and 4, then kindergarten, 1st grade, and she was finishing 2nd grade, and she had just turned 8. And the para, okay, so I asked the para, what is your role on the IEP team? Do you know what her goals are? Her IEP goals and objectives. And the para sat back, and we were in, when I interviewed this para, we were in the teacher's lounge, but there were no teachers there. There was no one else in the room, okay? I'm assuming the room wasn't booked. And the teacher sat, or the paraeducator sat back and said, no, I don't know the goals. I've never been shown them. But then she leaned forward and very quietly, she said to me, I have my own goals for Annie. And I said, oh, please tell me what they are. And she said, I want Annie to have friends. I want her to socialize with her friends. She said, when she goes out to recess, you know, the paraeducator goes with her and stays close enough that she can intervene if she needs to, but far enough away to let Annie be with her friends. And she said, you know, the tough part is that because of Annie's speech, she has a hard time being able to communicate with her peers. And so really, really a challenge that Annie and her paraeducator faced, because there was a lack of collaboration. And so you'll notice that I called this group autonomously independent, because everybody was doing their own thing. God bless Annie. You know, if you take a look, some people were speaking, some people were using PECs, some people were using devices. Annie didn't have a lot of consistency. All right, so now let me tell you about Bella. Bella was
Sorry, Doc, to interrupt.
Yes, please.
Jerome, did you have a question?
Yes.
Jerome?
Oh, I'm sorry, Jerome. Yes, I see your hand up. Do you want to come on, Jerome, and ask your question?
You have your hands up. So.
Or do you want to put it in the chat? Too fast to read.
Okay.
Yes, Bruce, you're going to get a copy of this. Absolutely. So, because it is, I know it's a lot. Realize this was my dissertation. And really what I want to share with you all is the paraeducator part of it. I debated even putting those pictures up there, but boy, they took me a long time to make. So, Jerome, if you want to put your question in the chat, that would be great. How about that? And then Michelle and Leah, if you can monitor, help me monitor. Okay, so now we have Bella. Bella was 6 years old. Bella was my tough one. Bella had a condition that was a terminal illness. She used a wheelchair for mobility. She had absolutely no spoken language. She relied on others for everything to meet her needs. Now, what I love about Bella is that, take a look at how Mom described her. She is redheaded, sassy, and she has a funny sense of humor. Bella would love to watch America's Funniest Videos, and she would laugh when people would fall or do something stupid. So Bella was in there, but Bella had a real hard time getting it out. She had a private speech and language pathologist who said Bella was a very smart girl who, if you gave her the moon, she wouldn't be happy with the moon. She would go for the stars. She would shoot for the stars. Now, Mom described Bella's communication with others using the yes, no, solid. This is where she would, I think people would put up two hands and say the right hand was yes and the left hand was no. And so they would hold them up and ask Bella a yes, no question. And so she would either look at the right hand for yes or the left hand for no. But she said the key is that it has to be consistent with people she trusts, because looking in your eyes is so personal. And she's consistent if she is comfortable with you. Okay. Now, Bella had started using a communication device called the Tobii, and it's spelled Tobii, Tobii. Tobies are now much smaller. Again, this was 2015 that I earned my PhD. And so in the 6 years since I worked with them, Tobies are much smaller, but Tobii at that point could get put up on a screen in front of Bella's wheelchair on a huge clip, and she would use eye gaze to put together messages, and it would read her eye gaze. Absolutely fabulous, absolutely fabulous. Now I'll tell you, that, okay, so let me find Bella. Is Bella, no, Bella's B. There we go. Oh, there's B. Okay, here's Bella. Okay, so the challenge with Bella was this, that the parents owned Bella's device. Okay, and is everybody ready? Bella's Toby cost $7,000. How many of you want that responsibility of taking care of a $7,000 device? Okay, everybody do this. 1, 2, 3, not me. And that's what basically the school said was, don't send it to school. We can't, because Bella's in a classroom. Bella was pretty much self-contained. She would go out in the mornings to one general ed class for like morning meeting, but then she was in the special ed room for the rest of the day. And, you know, some of the kids in the special ed room had some pretty aggressive behaviors. And the teacher was like, I can't take responsibility for a $7,000 device. Okay, well, what that basically then meant was that everyone at school was using the yes, no for Bella to be able to communicate. Now, what was very interesting that happened with our, with my not only did I interview, but I observed. I spent time in everybody's classroom, and then I also asked permission and received it that I got to spend time observing them outside of school. In Bella's case, I observed her in a private physical therapy session. Now, this was before COVID, so, you know, we didn't have any worries about, you know, COVID. But in Bella's case, I had called the mom the day before I was going into the school because I wanted Bella to know who I was. Bella had met me, but I wanted her to know, why am I in her classroom? And so I arranged with her special ed teacher to come in and observe for 2 hours. And then the kids were going to go out to PE. And then I was going to interview the special ed teacher. So I was going to stay in the room when the kids transitioned out. So this is how bright Bella is. Bella, when I came in, I smiled and nodded at her, but you know, as an observer, I want to try to literally be that fly on the wall. And so I didn't interact with her, and I sat in a corner and I just took notes. But then when it came time for Bella to transition out of the class, and I was staying in the class, Bella started to cry, leaving the classroom. Bella knew I was there for her. And why was she leaving if I was staying? And so I went over to Bella and I said, you know, Bella, I'm going to stay here with your teacher and talk with her, but I'll come to PE and see you in a few minutes. And she stopped crying. Again, what we absolutely need to understand with our kiddos, who just because they don't talk doesn't mean they don't understand everything that's going on. We have to presume that they understand everything. And so in Bella's case, if you take a look at this, you know, one of the biggest challenges with her para, take a look at the green, where, you know, from the peach color that says para to the green, what was happening with the para is the para used eye gaze. What the para would do is the para would hold up a board, and it was clear plastic. I used it all the time in my classroom for low tech. It was where, okay, I want you to picture a square, but with a square cut out in the middle. And the square cut out in the middle is so you can see the student and where they're looking. And then there are 4 quadrants, you know, there are quadrants. And so you look at, so that gives them 4 different things that they can look at. And you can put pictures up on the quadrants. So that's what I would do. And that's what the para did with Bella. So she used eye gaze. She also used the yes, no. However, take a look at this. She had absolutely no training whatsoever to work with Bella. That's a problem. You know, with a kiddo with Bella's needs, Bella needs assistive technology. Bella needs something to help her be able to communicate. And that's where the whole team needs to get together and sit down and say, how can we help her? And I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying you should be the only one making that decision. But boy, you all should be the one saying, hey, look, this is what I think is important that we need to talk about as a possible need. And then what it also includes is was the common goal for the parent. And for this parent, because she had no training, and I'll share with you that this parent had been brought on, she was brand new. She'd probably been there 3 months. So can you imagine being a brand new parent with a student with all of the needs that Bella has, and then nobody has given you any training? That to me, you know, falls clearly on the absolute positive lack of the school helping. The good news is, oh my gosh, you know, all of you all are going to leave these 10 hours with lots of information. All right. And I promise you that I'm going to give you things that you'll be able to do. So, okay, so that's our Bella. All right, so now let's go to Charlie. Okay, Charlie was 8 years old. Charlie has autism. Charlie, mom and dad interviewed. Mom and dad are a team. What we need to realize with our kiddos with significant disabilities is the divorce rate is very high. Divorce is hard, you know, marriage is hard anyway. However, if you have a child with a disability, the divorce rate skyrockets, absolutely skyrockets with our families. And I bet that's probably something that you all have experienced with the parents of your kiddos too. In Charlie's case, they're still married. They're still married today. I'm still friends with all 4 of these families. And in Charlie's case, whenever I went to go interview them, in Annie's case, well, no, in Annie's case, the dad did sit in on the interview, but the mother told him to be quiet. Do y'all have moms and dads like that? The mom's like, just be quiet. You don't have anything to say. I'm the one who's in charge. So the dad was there, but he never spoke. However, in Charlie's case, both mom and dad met with me. They were both, for the most part, equally involved. So what they talked about with Charlie is, you know, whenever I asked them to describe him, they described him as an outdoorsy kid who loves the water. When I went to go visit Charlie and observe him in his home, I met him at the bus stop. His parents would meet him there too. They lived in an apartment complex. And we walked from the bus stop to their apartment, which was it was a walk. Charlie had to touch every single tree on the way. He had to feel every single broken branch. He had to feel the cracks in the wall. He was such a sensory kid. Now, the scary part is that Charlie loved the water. And, you know, those of you who know, love, and support kiddos with autism, we need to teach them how to swim. We need to teach everybody how to swim. But we really need to teach kids who are identified as loving the water. Charlie would run towards water, whatever water it was. And so one of their challenges that they shared with me, separate from talking about how the team worked collaboratively, was Charlie scares us because we think he's going to drown someday. And every once in a while, you'll hear in the news, if you pay attention, you know, that a child is drowned and the child had autism. So now, interestingly, Charlie used an iPad with what was called the LAMP app on it, LAMP, all capitals. And I'll talk more about this, you know, in a later session. But LAMP stands for Language Acquisition and Motor Planning. Charlie wore it on a strap around his neck, and the iPad literally sat on his hip. And so for motor planning, it's kind of like typing on a keyboard. If you're a good typist, I'm still not. I've typed up my whole life, but we know where the keys are, right? So sometimes we don't even have to look at them. Same philosophy with the LAMP app, that we can teach kids to push icons on their iPad to communicate and make a sentence without even looking at it. And I'm telling you, Charlie speaks in full sentences using this LAMP device. So mom is the one who learned how to program the device. And she said, I learned on my own by taking courses over the internet. The private, he had outside of school speech and language pathologist, has been a great resource for help. But for the most part, I've made calls to tech support and visited help pages on the internet. The speech and language pathologist, the private one, said, I see they needed the LAMP app, and it's like nobody knows, she said. And the SPED teacher said, you know, I didn't love it, the iPad with the LAMP app on it at first, because it looked overwhelming at first, but it's really easy to learn. Charlie's paraeducator learned how to use the iPad with the LAMP app, so that anytime Charlie had a problem, she was able to help him with it. And he was able to communicate in every setting. Charlie was 8 years old at the time of my interview. Very similar. He had some words that he could say, not a lot. So he used this device. So he was very similar to Annie, but guess what? Charlie had no challenging behaviors. You know why? Charlie could say, I don't want mustard on my cheeseburger. Charlie could say, I want Dr. Pepper. Charlie could say things that meant something to him. Now, he still has huge difficulties communicating feelings. You know, he's still working. He's a work in progress. But he at least had communication, and his paraeducator got trained. So let's look at, oh wait, C is up at the top, isn't it? Yep, here's C. Take a look. Everybody worked together on this. See how the green doesn't have any lines in it? He used an iPad with the LAMP app in all environments. He did use a separate device called a Dynavox as a backup. Okay, and the reason that came up, are you ready for this? His paraeducator was with him at Special Olympics. We have a big state Special Olympics, all right, before COVID. Again, he wears it on a strap on his hip. He's at Special Olympics state games, and they had a big bounce house, and he saw it, and he started running towards it, and his para, all not thinking it through, but knowing if he gets on that bounce house with that $1,000 iPad, what's going to happen to the iPad? And so she says, Charlie, take your iPad off. He takes it off, full run. He's still running, and he throws it. And the first thing it hit was a tree, and it shatters the iPad. It gives me goosebumps because we all know we're trying our best, and she was trying her best to keep that iPad safe. Now, the good news is iPads and things like that should have warranties, and it did. It had a warranty. We got it fixed, but it was down for a while, so he used a backup. But take a look at the green as we go around. It also says every single member had training. The para had training on how to use his iPad with the LAMP app.
Oh, because
So very, very important that she had the training. So that's our Charlie. So that was passionately involved. Everyone was passionately involved in helping Charlie. My last one, though, believe it or not, is even better than Charlie. This is Danny. Danny's mom and I are very good friends now. I actually met Danny and Danny's mom at my husband's retired military. As you can kind of see from all the colleges I went to, I went to Norfolk, Virginia, Boston, and then to OSU. And so I've moved around a lot. Danny's parents are military, and I met them at the base pool. In comes Danny in his motorized wheelchair. Danny was 5 when I met him.
Miss Beasley.
Danny has severe delays in all areas. He experienced severe brain damage. He has absolutely very limited mobility. He uses eye gaze primarily because we have yet to identify a muscle or movement that he has control over. Okay, so mom describes Danny as a child who loves school, loves social interaction. Danny has an older brother. And you know what? I want you to think about your kiddos that you're one-on-ones with or that you work with within your schools. If they have siblings, siblings are the best. I can yell at my brother. Y'all can't yell at my brother, but I can yell at my brother because I'm his sibling. right? That siblings can bring such good things to relationships, and Danny's brother does. He loves some videos. He was outgrowing some of the babier videos. He loves sight words. Okay, can I tell you that? He loves sight words. Danny was learning to read using eye gaze, and he loves swimming. Oh, Jerome has family in Oklahoma. And so his SPED kindergarten teacher said, he has such a quirky personality and so loving and so ornery at times and so boy. The gen ed teacher, Danny spent most of his day in general education with his para educator. Boy, are you important to that dynamic. The gen ed teacher said he's very vocal. Danny made a lot of vocalizations. He loves sight words. Isn't it interesting that I interviewed all these people separately, but that almost every one of them came up with, Danny loves to read. He loves what we're doing on the smartboard. He loves centers and he loves insects. He doesn't have the limitations that you might think he does. That was his general ed teacher. And then this is whenever Danny started to use the Toby, which is the device that Bella used. Bella's parents and Danny's parents actually met through a support group, and Bella's parents taught Danny's parents about the Toby. And so he was beginning to use it and learning that if he looked at a box on the screen, that it would say something. And so the SPED kindergarten teacher said, I was amazed. I was like, I'll blow bubbles all day long if you're going to do that. He would ask her on the Toby eye gaze, please blow bubbles. And so do you see where you need to know your kiddo and know what he'll work for? Danny wanted to see bubbles. And she said, it's a machine that will allow him to ask questions and converse with his friends by using eye gaze. And so Danny was able to do that using his device. And now it's amazing what he's doing with it. But so, okay, so here's Danny. And I called this the meeting of the minds group. And the reason I did is this. You'll see, just like with Charlie, there are no lines on the green. Everybody worked together. With Charlie, there was still a little bit of breakdown. Mom was really, in charge of that. But in this case, nobody was the leader. Everybody worked together. And so you'll take a look that all of the stakeholders, all of the team members have the initial training in the Toby. The paraeducator was the first one being trained on it. They all wanted Danny to be both social and academic. In Danny's case, he hadn't given them a solid yes, no yet. Like, look here for yes, look here for no. He was very inconsistent with that. And that made it really hard to make decisions. He was getting better with eye gaze, and definitely, if you know kiddos who vocalize to say things, to make their points made like they're happy or not, like in Bella's case, crying whenever she was being taken out of the room, vocalizations tell us a lot, don't they? And so Danny used a lot of those. But so what was happening is they decided, Danny had such intense needs that they decided that once a month, everybody would get together on a Friday afternoon after all the kids were gone for 15 minutes and just talk real quickly. How's he doing? What's he doing? Anybody having any problems? And so they then came up with lots of great ideas. And you know who was one of the leaders of that team? The paraeducator, because she was with Danny in every single setting. And so this team was, so what was really nice, if you take a look through the 4 that I've discussed, we really had an incredible amount of experience, all the way, from one end of the continuum where the para wasn't included in anything and wasn't trained, all the way to Danny's where, she not only was trained, but she was a leader in caring for him and making decisions for him, or at least having her voice heard, her or his, for our gentlemen, their voices heard. And so the key is, for collaborative processes, you need to know your student well enough and you need to know some things. You need to have received training, which is our goal. Okay, so we are ready to talk about your make and take. Michelle and Leah, have we sent them out?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, Dr. Gretchen, we did
Okay.
send them out to the participants.
Very good. Okay, so you all have this as the instructions, but I'm gonna kind of walk through it with you, okay? So I'm gonna stop sharing so I can show you my screen. Okay, so I have a noodle. Thank goodness noodles are cheap.
Sorry, JFK, don't have.
You may want to check with your school administrator. It was dropped off to all the schools. We dropped off all the kits for the entire workshop.
Yay.
Even
Very
to
good.
Mooney Elementary?
Yes, every single school got, we delivered.
Okay, very good. And the good news is you'll have a copy of this PowerPoint. So if you don't have the materials right now, and really this is going to take you some time, so I would encourage you to just listen to, and I'll walk you through it. But the nice part, and then you can do it whenever you get the materials. What you need to realize that with assistive technology is this. They kind of fall into two categories. We call them low tech and high tech. To be honest, I also think there's kind of a mid-tech, but so what I'm going to show you today, though, is completely low-tech. Anything that is low-tech, okay, in my little pea brain, I feel like low-tech means no batteries, okay, and very easy, okay, and for the most part, low-tech are things that you have lying around your house. And so literally, this was a pool noodle. My grandchildren forgave me that I borrowed one of their pool noodles. What you do is you take a full-size pool noodle, and you don't even really have to have a ruler. You hold it up to your keyboard. Okay, I've got my keyboard here, and you mark the noodle to be as long as the keyboard. Okay, so that's the first cut you make, is you cut through the center and you make it as long. This is as long as my keyboard is. Okay, then what I did is I drew lines. You can tell I already cut it. I drew lines on either side to mark where I cut it. And I took a knife. This would not be something I'd do with kids. Sometimes with low tech, you can have your kids help you, but this is something you need to be doing. I think they could probably do the next step, but so I cut it down this side and then I cut it down this side. And you know what's great about it is you now have two wrist guards, wrist pads for your keyboards. What I really like about this, especially now that we're in the day and age of COVID, is wouldn't it be nice to give each kid their own key guard, their keyboard wrist pad guard, right? So, and so they can write their names on it, they can decorate it, but then what you do is you take just, I have furniture pad felt pads, and you take them and you put them on, I've already put one on, and so you would then put another one on the other side. This is where kids might be able, oh, my things are really old. There's, oh, hang on. You know, it would help if I took the sticky part off. Okay, I'm taking the sticky part off now. And then you stick it on at either end, and that keeps it from sliding. Now you could, okay, you can see mine aren't even. That would bother me. I don't know how many of y'all have OCD, but I'm on the edge of OCD. And so I would probably peel it up and try it again. But you could mark it with like a marker and then have your kiddos help you put them on. And so you put them on all four, and then you put it on next to your keyboard, and you have your own keyboard wrist pad that the students can use to keep them from getting carpal tunnel or keep them just from getting tired of typing. And so it's a fabulous, and we call it a make and take. And again, very, very inexpensive. And in this day and age of COVID, absolutely positively something you need to be thinking about for safety in your classrooms is that everybody has their own. It stays in their cubby. When it's time to do computer work, they can take it out and put it on, or you as the parent, I'm going to start using it as a tool, or you as a parent can carry it in your bag or have the student carry it between classes if they have computer work in all the different classes. So I love make and takes. They're one of my favorites. As a teacher and an educator, we're always looking for inexpensive things. And thank you to GSAP for getting all the supplies out to you all to be able to do it. So I am at 6:57, and I'm really sorry to say that, but now I say, are there any questions? Anybody have a burning question at this point of the night or day? You guys are in the day. I'm at the night. I know, now we'll hear crickets.
We're-
Okay, so, yes.
We're enjoying you.
Okay, go ahead.
We're enjoying your speech and the meeting. Thank you.
Good, thank you so much. I hope so. You were just trying out the wristpad. Good job.
We're
Well,
just
and-
learning what you're teaching us to do.
Very good.
Just saying.
Yes. Thank you. Well, and you're going to learn
A
a
lot
lot
of
more.
motivation. A lot of motivation.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. You all are so important that again, you know, whenever Michelle and Leah asked if I would be interested in doing this, you all are the most important audience I will ever present to, ever. And so we have a lot more to learn. So please come back tomorrow morning. This is what I want you to be thinking about that I'm going to ask you to share in the chat room tomorrow. What I'd like you to think about just over the next day is, what's your biggest concern about being a paraeducator in the next year? Don't answer yet. I want you to think about it. What's your biggest concern being a paraeducator in the next year? So that'll be something I want us to talk about so we can talk through things. So, all right, I have that we have less than a minute, so I'll turn it over to Michelle for final thoughts.
Thank you so much. Lots of learning going on. And so when you go back to the schools, or you're already back, but once you start the school year, at least one of the questions that you'd want to ask is, what is my role, right, as a paraeducator? And ask about the goals, right? What are the goals that you need to work on? So you saw all those charts that Dr. Gretchen Kool-Aid presented, and how some, I'm glad you shared that some of them were really cohesive, where everybody, it showed that everybody didn't work together and what ended up happening, versus a chart where people really work together, right? So that they come out with a common goal, as opposed to confusion. So thank you for attending. I wanted to give a shout out to the staff here at Cedars who worked so hard to put everything together, from printing the handouts to just organizing it. Leah and the team, Ruel, we've got folks who did deliveries all day. They pretty much went all around the island. Steph, Colin, Brittany, Ryan, they went all around the island. So if you haven't received your Make It and Take It gift bags, well, it's a gift of learning. Please check out your special education administrator. Go Koble them until you get them, because those are really great tools that you can use. Any last minute questions that you may have? We're very appreciative that we've been given this opportunity to offer the training. It's a brunch. So you've got, unfortunately, we're not able to sit together and have brunch together, but at least imagine a virtual brunch. But thank you, Dr. Kool-Aid.
Do we need to sign in?
See you all tomorrow. Actually, there is a sign-in form, I believe, that was disseminated. So,
I'm sorry, Miss Trisha should have sent a link on the side. Let me check and see.
Thank you again.
The badge should have been delivered also.
But we're doing it at home.
Haven't received it. Okay, and I do apologize for the technical difficulties that some people have been experiencing today. I don't know, it may be your audio settings that you would have to check on Zoom to see if a speaker is correctly selected, because you know, when you log in, it gives you the option to use audio settings on the computer or to dial in. So make sure you use computer settings.
Because I will share with you all that recently I was in a meeting where I couldn't hear anybody, and it turned out my cat had walked behind my monitor and shut my speaker off.
Oh,
So if you have a cat, you might be able to blame them on it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ms. Trish, for allowing us to be part of your training. Did you want to say a few words?
Yes, no, I just wanted to just share my appreciation again to Dr. Colade and the Cedars group for putting this all together. And then a welcome again to all our aides. Welcome back for the school year. And we have more to come. So hopefully you take away a lot of good information from these trainings. But thank you again, and we'll see you in the next several days.
I'll see you all tomorrow.
Thank you, Dr. Gretchen Colade.
You're most welcome. So I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.